Hey gang, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are and whatever you're doing. It's time for another 5 Points Foundation video, and today is not a playing video, so I'm not actually going to be teaching you any techniques or tips or tricks about actually playing, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to make a guitar play as well as it possibly can to make your job of learning it easier. So obviously I don't know what your specific requirement is, whether you've had an injury or you've got a disability or you were just born a certain way like I was. So I'm just going to talk about some general ideas and thoughts. I think this is probably aimed at people who perhaps have been playing guitar for less than a year, or complete novices, complete beginners. And I think a lot of the time you've got a guitar and it's a guitar. As a beginner, you just think, well, I've got a guitar and there it is. But obviously to somebody who's more used to looking at different guitars and been playing guitar longer, that guitar that you've got might be suffering from some problems which might be inhibiting your learning. So today I'm going to talk about some general ideas and concepts and things to look for on your guitar. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be able to take a critical look at the instrument that you've got, or if you're buying an instrument to learn to play, you'll be able to take a critical look at that and compare instruments and really look at a few simple details that could make all the difference in your learning and the ease with which you're able to play that instrument. So the object here is not necessarily to get you to fix those problems yourself, if there are problems with the guitar, but at least it will allow you to make an informed decision about whether to take that guitar to a luthier or not. I see things on social media, new guitar players, should I take my guitar to a guitar tech and have it set up? And the concept of what does a setup mean? I mean, as a musician, as a guitarist who's been playing for too long, I know what a setup is and I know what to look for when a guitar's being set up. But as a beginner, you might have no idea, so you could hand over your hard-earned cash to some guy down the road who said he'll set your guitar up and he'll give it to you back, and would you even know if it's been set up? And obviously there could be specific requirements that you've got due to a physical condition or injury or something like that, where you might want some of the opposite things of what I'm going to talk about in this video for whatever reason. But at least if that is the case, let's just think, you've got one hand and you haven't got your picking hand, so you mount a plectrum or something to whatever is remaining of your arm, and that might mean that you prefer heavy strings and a high action because you don't have the control and you tend to hit the strings really hard. Well, if that's the case, then that's a specific requirement, but at least you could think about that. So that would be kind of the opposite of what I'm recommending in this video, but obviously that would be a very specific case. The object is just to get you thinking about the guitar's playability. It is so crucially important. Never let anybody tell you that, good guitar players can just go and pick up a guitar in a guitar shop and play brilliantly. That's rubbish, that's complete rubbish. Yeah, some guitar players are capable of doing that if they might be quite simplistic guitar players or they're used to playing with high actions and heavy strings. But I guarantee you, Eric Johnson cannot walk into a guitar shop, pick up a guitar with 12s and play like Eric Johnson. He needs a very specific setup on his guitar to do what he does. Or, Alan Holdsworth, couldn't play. He had extremely light strings and an extremely flat fingerboard and massive frets to be able to play like that. It's a very idiosyncratic thing, the way that a guitar is set up, and it should be set up for you and your requirements. And your requirements will change as you embark on this journey of playing guitar. I have a handy little prop here today, so for this video I'm going to assume we're talking about acoustic guitars. I don't have my acoustic guitar with me today, but I do have this fantastic little nylon strung, I think this is a half-size guitar. It's quite good. It has all of the components of an acoustic guitar, so it will allow me to talk you through some of the things to look for when you're buying a guitar, or look for it on the guitar that you already own. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. I think one of the crucial things to look for before you look at anything else at all is the height of the strings above the fingerboard. Okay, so this thing here, this bit of wood, which is usually a separate bit of wood mounted on the front of the neck, and it has the frets mounted in it, is usually called the fretboard or the fingerboard of the guitar. And the height of the strings above the fretboard or the fingerboard, we'll call it the fingerboard in this video, is called the guitar's action. So I'm going to give you a quick zoom in here. So I'm hoping you can see this and the camera is focusing on this, but you can see here the string is above the fingerboard, Let's try and get you a shot that you can see. And let's try and give you a shot where you can see what the kind of action. Now this guitar has what I would term a high action. I think this is quite high. Now it's not too bad on a nylon strung guitar, but just to give you some idea of what this guitar is like. This is the nut of the guitar. Very, very similar to the bridge of the guitar, which is here. We call it the nut when it's on this end. So the strings pass through the nut towards the headstock of the guitar and towards the machine heads or the tuning keys. This guitar has something called a 0 fret, so this is not typical. This is not something that you usually see, and I'm not going to get into why they have such a thing as a 0 fret. I don't know if you can see this, I'm really hoping you can. If you look at the action close to the nut here, it's actually quite low, and then as we move down the neck, the action gets higher and higher and higher. So this is what we call an uneven action on a guitar. You haven't got to push the strings down much here, but up here, you've got to press the strings down a lot more. And actually, if you look at the neck, I think with this neck, it's curved, and I think you can even see it from the side, which is quite unusual because this neck is quite curved. So if you look at the face of the fingerboard in relation to the plane of the string, you should be able to see that the neck is almost sticking out this way at the headstock end. I'm trying to rotate this so that you can see the string. Now the way we actually look for this on a guitar is to hold the guitar like this. So the light isn't very good here, I can't really demonstrate this very well. But looking down the edge of the fingerboard compared to the string, you can see that there's a big gap there, but not such a big gap here. Usually you need to hold the guitar into the light, so the light is over there for me, so it's a bit difficult to do it for you. Yeah, so on this particular guitar, you can see, I hope you can see, that the neck is pushing forwards here. The strings are pulling the neck forwards. Okay, there's actually a curve. Now, this guitar doesn't have a truss rod. It's sort of a bit of a toy guitar, really. It works quite well. But most guitars would have a truss rod in which you'd be able to pull that back to create a more even action all the way up the neck of the guitar. I mean, the object would be to have the action brought down something like that. Okay. I'm sorry this is a bit difficult to see. Maybe I'll zoom in on what I'm doing here. So all guitar necks actually have a little bit of a bow in them here. Very rarely are they absolutely flat as they run up the length of the neck. And this bow in a guitar's neck is called relief. So we're learning lots of new words here today. This is the relief of a guitar neck. When a guitar neck is absolutely straight and doesn't curve at all, we say that the relief is straight, the neck is straight, or there is no relief in the neck. When the neck is allowed to curve forwards a little bit, like this one is, quite a lot, we'd say there's a lot of relief, there's a big curve in this neck. So this guitar has a lot of relief, and because it has a lot of relief, it has a high action. If we could pull the neck back, the action would get lower. So if I could pull the headstock back towards me here, the action on the guitar would get lower. And that is what a truss rod in the neck of most guitars does. It allows you to control the amount of relief in the neck. Now, as I mentioned, this guitar is a bit of a toy guitar, really. So normally there would be on an acoustic guitar a truss rod adjustment in here, inside the sound hole at the end, on the end of the neck. Or in some instances, it would be at the headstock end. And that would allow you to bring this neck back and lower the action of the acoustic guitar. That might be quite a challenging technical thing to do and judge as a beginner guitar player. If you've looked at it like I've shown you to look at it and you think that something might be wrong, it could be worth just taking it, booking an appointment, taking your guitar to a guitar tech somewhere local to you who's got a good reputation, and just asking them to have a look at it. In summary, in terms of the neck, considering the relief of the neck and the height of the action as a result of that, that's something to look for, okay? There are some other tests you can do to check about the relief in a neck, and that involves putting your finger on the first fret of the guitar and the last fret of the guitar, testing somewhere around the 7th fret how much of a gap there is when you push down on the string. But this technique involves you judging how much of a gap you would expect to see at the midpoint between your two fretted parts of the string, and that's not an exact science. That involves a bit of experience and looking at something and thinking, oh, that's enough relief, or that's not enough relief. So I think probably worth taking it to a friend or a tech at that point to have a look at that. But if you would like to know more in-depth details about getting that relief absolutely perfect, taking it to the next level, then by all means request it and I'll make a video specifically studying that with some macro shots on exactly what you should expect to see. But yeah, the action that I would prefer to have on an acoustic guitar, certainly from a beginner's perspective, is probably sort of about 2 millimeters, something like that, above the frets for most of the neck. In parts here, these strings are easily 5 mil above the frets, and that's a substantially high action. As I mentioned before, this is a nylon strung guitar, and if you watch Dinho's videos, he recommends starting with nylon string guitars because these are quite easy to bend and quite easy to fret. So a higher action on a nylon strung guitar isn't necessarily too big a problem. In fact, they do tend to have slightly higher actions than steel strung guitars. So if you're satisfied that the relief in your guitar neck is okay or acceptable, looks okay to you, i.e. there's not too much of a difference between the height of the string here to the height of the string here, then your problem with a high action could exist somewhere else. So I think the first place that I would look is the bridge of the guitar. This guitar has quite a high bridge, and that can be reduced. Probably better to take it to a guitar tech, but if you suspect that the strings are essentially doing this is a sort of an exaggerated view of that, you know, the bridge is very high so the strings are doing that, then yeah, the bridge could be the thing to have a look at. Generally, in reducing the height of a bridge on an acoustic guitar, this bridge can actually be pulled out. It's usually not held in with anything. And then the back edge of the bridge can be reduced a bit, sanded or something like that, to reduce the height of it. But this is a bit of a trial and error process, and I mean, an expert guitar tech would know exactly how much to reduce that by. I've done it myself in the past, and I've just sanded a bit off the back edge of the bridge and put the bridge back in, put a string on it, had a look at it, and then tried it again until I've got it right. But that is a bit of a hit and miss process, and it can be quite time consuming, and of course these bridges are quite fragile, which means you could break the bridge. So yeah, and you wouldn't want to file anything off the front or the top edge of the bridge, because this has got grooves in it to allow the strings to pass over the bridge. Probably something that you could mention to a guitar tech. You could actually go and visit a tech and have some specific things to ask them to look at for you, which is quite good because you seem informed when you're going there. Much less likely that someone is going to try to pull the wool over your eyes or take the piss a bit with the work they're doing, because you'll go in armed with some knowledge. So yeah, the bridge is the next place that I would look. And then actually, the third place that I would look is the nut. So the nut is almost the same as the bridge, but on the other end of the guitar. This one has a 0 fret, so it's not a very good example for the purposes of this video. But sometimes nuts can be cut poorly, which means the guitar won't stay in tune. Strings can sometimes stick in the grooves of the nut, so when you're tuning the guitar, you might hear a string sticking in the nut and then suddenly go out of tune or up or down in pitch very quickly. Because it's caught in there. So that's something to look at. You might need to look at that if you change guitar strings, if you change the gauge of your guitar strings. Sometimes the grooves in the nut are no longer the right size for the strings that you've got. So that doesn't happen often, but it can happen, and it's worth considering. And also the height of this nut. So actually, one of my pet hates on a lot of even expensive modern electric guitars is how poorly they're set up from the nut perspective. I've played a lot of American professional Strats, and the first thing that I would need to do with them is go and have the nuts recut to reduce the height of the strings at the nut. It's something that gets overlooked in terms of the action and playability of a guitar, so don't overlook it. Look at the nut, look at how much you have to push the string down to fret a note on the first fret, so from E to F, open E to that fretted F. If you have to push the string down a lot there, that string is actually going out of tune when you're fretting that note, and that's not good because it's going to make you sound bad. And it's hard enough to sound good on a guitar without strings going out of tune when you're just playing a chord. So this needs to be considered. This nut needs to be well cut so that the strings don't stick, and it needs to be not too high. Right, so what have we covered? We've covered 3 aspects of the setup so far. We've covered the relief in the neck, we've covered the height of the bridge, and we've covered the height and cut of the nut. And really, I think today in this video, there's only one other thing that I would like to cover, and that is the strings themselves. So, if you're playing a nylon string guitar, I actually don't know too much about nylon string guitars. I imagine there must be different gauges of strings for nylon string guitars, but I'm not sure how much of a difference they would make, and they're fairly easy to play anyway. For the purposes of discussing strings, let's imagine that this was a steel strung guitar, and probably by far the biggest number of acoustic guitars that are sold are steel strung guitars, certainly in the UK, I would imagine. Strings come in various different gauges. So when you buy strings, you buy them in a set of strings, and you can go into any guitar shop and see hundreds probably of different manufacturers with all pretty coloured, brightly coloured packets of strings on them. Generally, strings are sold as electric guitar strings or acoustic guitar strings. And obviously for the purposes of this video, we're talking about sets of 6 strings, not 7 or 8 or 9 string sets or 12 string sets, just regular 6 string acoustic guitars. Now in general, on acoustic guitars, people tend to play heavier strings than on electric guitars. So what do I mean by the word heavier? So strings are available in gauges. So here I have a set of electric guitar strings. These are made by Ernie Ball and they're called Primo Slinky. Let's just imagine that you've never bought a set of strings. So, okay, some of you will find this boring because you know about this already. But on the front of this set of strings, it tells you what the gauges are of each individual string. We tend to name them by the thinnest, lightest string in the set. So in the instance of this set, it's a bit complicated. These are 9.5. Usually it's 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s or 8s. When you hear guitar players talking about the gauge of strings that they use, they'll say, I use 9s. When you buy a set of 9s or 10s, it's not just the thinner string that's different. All of the strings are progressively heavier with the heavier sets of strings. Heavier meaning 10s are heavier than 9s, 11s are heavier than 10s. You know, I use relatively light strings on my electric guitar. These are like a hybrid set of 9.5s. That's what I would call them. And the gauges go from the top E string, so that's this string, down to the bottom E string. And in this set, they are 9.5, 12, that's the B string, 16, that's the G string, 24, that's the D string, 34, that's the A string, and 44, which is the E string, the low E string. All of those, if I bought a set of 9s or 8s, they would all be lighter than those values for each string. So in a set of 9s, for example, it would be 22, 32, 42 rather than 24, 34, 44. So I'm labouring the point here to tell you is that all of the strings get progressively heavier through heavier gauge set of strings. Something I want to put in here while we're talking about strings is some people leave strings on the guitar for years. In some instances that's desirable. Ry Cooder used to do it, or still does it, I think. But in the main, if you're playing guitar regularly, you should be changing your strings fairly regularly. If you're a beginner, I'm not saying you should change your strings every 2 weeks, but if you've got an acoustic guitar and you're playing guitar for 10 minutes a day, after a couple of months you should be thinking about changing your strings. As your strings get older, they will lose their life, they'll lose their sparkle, and they won't stay in tune as much, and sometimes they even feel harder to play as the elasticity goes out of the strings. Also, there may be some corrosion building up on the strings, which will cut into your fingers more, and the strings won't feel very smooth. It's a good idea to clean your strings with a dry, lint-free microfiber cloth after playing. Usually I would get a cloth and just put it in between my fingers and run it up and down each string. And when you look at that cloth after maybe a week's playing or something, you'll be quite surprised how much black stuff comes off the strings. So that's definitely worth doing, and it's worth changing your strings fairly regularly. Another good reason is because you get into the pattern of how to change strings, and you can do it very quickly. So I think that's a good thing. Something I've seen with many beginners is I pick up the guitar and I say, when was the last time you changed a string? And they say, I've never changed the strings. And that's not good. They're black and they're corroded and they don't sound good. They won't stay in tune. They cut your fingers to shreds. Change the strings regularly. And don't just change one string. If you break a string and the set of strings has been on there for 2 months, change all the strings, because you want the guitar to be giving you everything it can give you in terms of playability and sound, making you sound as good as you possibly can be. Okay, so back to the specifics of strings then. So I mentioned earlier, there's electric varieties and acoustic varieties. So broadly speaking, Most electric guitar players, 6-string guitar players, will use strings that are, say, between 9 and 11. It's a tiny difference between a 9 and a 10 or a 22 and a 24 gauge string, but that makes a huge difference on the guitar. Just the difference between a set of 9s and 10s. I mean, 9s are right next to 10s in terms of the order of strings, but there's a massive difference in the feel of that and how hard they are to play and the volume that they produce. There is a big difference. And between 9s and 11s, there's a really, really big difference. Or between 8s and 11s, there's a huge difference. It really affects the playability and sound of the guitar. Now, for acoustic players, as I mentioned earlier, generally play heavier strings than electric players. That's because a lot of acoustic players, and I'm generalising here, so there will be people screaming at the computer saying, no, I know somebody who doesn't do this, but in general, a lot of acoustic players tend to play chord melody stuff. It's either open chords or chords finger picking. So having heavier strings makes the guitar a bit louder, and they're not trying to play fast or trying to bend, or they're just playing chords anyway. So, okay, that's fine. But I would say that to begin with, even if you're playing an acoustic guitar, going for a lighter set of strings is a really good idea, because it kind of emulates what Dinho said about playing a nylon strung guitar. And I think you just don't need to be dealing with the added physicality of trying to play very heavy strings. And particularly then, I've seen some beginners' guitars that have heavy strings and a really high action, and the strings are really old. I mean, these things are almost unplayable. I can barely fret a note on some of these guitars that I've seen. So how they are doing it, I don't know. And they've shown me, people who've been starting out, shown me their fingers, and there's like black lines where the string's cutting into the fingertip, and then sort of as they're playing, all of the dirt and crap that's on the string is coming out and sticking to their fingers. This is bad. We don't want that. It shouldn't be like that. It should never be like that. I've, for years, been putting electric sets of guitar strings onto my acoustic guitars because I like to play bluesy style acoustic where there's lots of bending and things like that, and I'm just used to a plain G string. And I've used quite light sets. I've put sets of 11s, electric 11s, onto my acoustic guitar, and that feels quite nice and light on an acoustic compared to, standard acoustic strings. And I also think that if you buy a set of acoustic 11s, they tend to have heavier gauges in them than a set of electric 11s. So by the time you get to the low E string on an acoustic set, I think that would be heavier than the equivalent electric set of 11s. So the strings would be overall getting heavier. I mean, some people don't like doing that because lots of acoustic strings are what they call phosphor bronze strings, so they're gold in colour, apart from the non-wound strings, which are always, if they're nickel or steel strings, they are nickel or steel coloured. But the wound strings would have a phosphor bronze wrap, which makes them look gold. There must be some tonal thing about that which people favour for acoustics. But I would say as a beginner, you just need to be playing something that is comfortable to play. And yes, okay, if you were playing sort of finger style folk guitar or strumming acoustic guitar, then eventually you might want to get to the point where you're playing a heavier set of phosphor bronze strings, proper acoustic strings, because you're playing in front of audiences or in front of friends and you want more volume from the guitar. But if you're within the first year of playing a guitar, that little difference in volume probably won't make any difference to you. And heavier strings are louder than lighter strings, or tend to be, so you would gain more volume. But if you're just talking about practice and learning to play the instrument, well, how loud do you need an acoustic guitar to be? You don't need it to be filling concert halls and auditoriums up, do you? And you're probably not playing with other instruments yet. And the difference in volume is probably, 20% or something like that. So, I would strongly consider putting, light or ultra-light acoustic strings on your acoustic. And that could be, I don't know acoustic strings very well, but that could be 10s or 11s. Or even a set of 10s or 11s electric strings on your acoustic. They will fit and they will work just as well. Go for lighter strings, get the action down as much as you reasonably can. Make your life a bit easier. And actually, this is the same information I would give to people who are starting out, whether they've got a physical impairment or not. Even if they were completely 10-fingered, 2 hands, normal, should we say, whatever that means. But I'd still recommend starting out this way and building up, because as you build up the strength in your fingers, then you can go for heavier strings and look at different setups and that kind of thing. I suppose as a footnote to this, I would say that if you're struggling with strings being too difficult to play, a quick fix for that is to maybe drop the tuning of the whole guitar down a semitone or half a step. That can create the feel of a lighter set of strings, which are easier to play and easier to depress. So if you've got, at the moment you're struggling with a high action, you've got some heavier strings or something like that, and you haven't got the capacity to get to a guitar tech or enough money to go and buy another set of strings right now, then another way around it would be maybe just dropping the tuning of the guitar a little bit. One semitone would be enough, so tuning everything flat by a semitone. Most tuning apps or guitar tuners, or I use the Fender one, but it allows you to calibrate that tuner, so you can say I want it half a step down in E flat, the whole guitar to be tuned to E flat. And that's a quick fix. That's a quick fix into having a slightly more playable guitar until maybe you can get it looked at. But yeah, I hope I've given you some insight into what makes a guitar play well and the feel of it, and how that can help you learn and move forward, because this is all about if you've got sort of an injury or a physical impairment or a disability, it's hard enough learning to play an instrument. It's hard enough anyway, so don't make it any harder. And don't listen to too many people on internet forums and things saying, oh, you've got to have a high action because the tone is better. Let's just learn to play the guitar first and we'll worry about the tone later. I think, get those calluses going, get the fingers moving if you've got fingers. So that was the object of this video. I hope maybe you can come back to it and use it as a reference, maybe next time you're changing some strings, or you're looking at your guitar one day and thinking, does this play as well as it could? And as always, please leave some comments, tell us your stories. We're looking for people now to tell us about their specific requirements. When I did my personal video on my YouTube channel, which kind of kicked this whole process off, there were loads of people who came out with really interesting stories and very specific things. I cut my fingertip off last year and I've been playing guitar for years and I need to get back to find out how to play guitar without that fingertip anymore. So anything like that is really helpful for us, and we're really happy to make some specific videos for you based on your experiences and your requirements. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. A lot more of this content coming up. As always, please share with your friends and family and anyone that you might know that might benefit from seeing our course of lessons. And yeah, if you could subscribe to the channel, it all helps. It helps us get closer to making more of these videos and getting more of this content out there and getting more of you playing when you didn't necessarily think you could. So thanks very much for watching, and see you again next week. Cheers.